I prepared my remarks for the first time ever, and as I'm listening to everything, I'm thinking, well, no, but I really want to talk about that. But I will go through my remarks and talk about what the book is. Thank you first to Surya for inviting me. We met at another conference on El Sistema just this past June. I'm not a musician, I'm not an educator, I'm not an arts policy wonk. I'm a writer, and music has dominated my life in all kinds of ways, and I love and have been inspired by music of many different kinds. You know, I love jazz, and my first and thus far only novel was based on the life of a female jazz trumpeter. I love to dance. Boogie to Motown and James Brown and Aretha, and way back in the day, I was part of a semi-professional Afro-Cuban troupe, and even studied with Alvin Ailey for a while. I can't say that I'm totally down with hip hop, but a groove is groove, and now that the words have moved out of the gutter, I can be there. But I also love classical music, and I enjoyed it before I married into it for a while. But as I became more immersed, I was exposed to the best of the best, and it became a passion. But you also see before you a genuine veteran of the 20th century culture wars. I was part of the second wave of black students who spent more time sitting in, closing down, and restructuring than formally studying, and helped to establish Harvard's Department of African and Afro-American Studies with my undergraduate thesis on the Black aesthetic and visual communications, which I thought should be based on Black musical rhythms, by the way. I became a card-carrying member of the Black arts movement. I saw things in black and white, and black was beauty. But time passed, I worked with all kinds of different people, I traveled, and I learned to see not just shades of gray, but the rainbow. It took me a good deal of soul searching, but I came to understand that my loving classical music was neither an abandonment of my political ideals nor a portrayal of who I proudly was. Which is not to say that the classical music world is all welcoming sweetness and light. Some weeks ago, I had an interview with the Evening Standard in which I casually mentioned that I was always aware of being in the extreme minority at classical concerts, as all of us are aware when we turn up in places where we're not expected, or the norm. And the Trolls had a field day. It had been a while since I had been in the public eye, and I was unprepared for the fact that these days, all you do is wiggle a little finger above the parapet of what whomever thinks is acceptable. And it all comes down, and most of it is just plain stupid. One of the more sympathetic remarks styled me as feeling, quote, victimized and ostracized, unquote, when I go to concerts. One of my few replies to the nonsense was, thank you, but that's not how I feel. I am not a masochist. I go to lots of concerts. Why would I go if they made me feel so bad? I was reminded, however, of why some folks can be wary of venturing through those doors. The challenge is to separate the music itself from the socio-cultural dissonance that surrounds it, the snobbishness and the condescension, the arcane behavior of how to listen and when to clap. In writing soul music, after exploring my own path into and out of cultural nationalism, I wanted to find out if young people who are taking part in a number of the Western classical music as salvation phenomena around the world were having the same identity crises of dedicating their hours and souls to the music of the oppressor as I had had. In each case, in Palestine, in Kinshasa, in Venezuela, the answer was no. In Ramallah, Ramzi Abu Redwan, 30-year-old former child stone thrower from the first Intifada, whose life was essentially saved by a viola, who was part of the first intake of the Barenboim Said West Eastern Divan Orchestra and went on to establish the El Kamajavi Music School, has lost both his father and his brother to the conflict and remains extremely political. I mean, extremely political. But Ramzi's credo is that music has no politics, it's just sound. His colleague in charge of the school's branch in Jenin, who was an oud player, by the way, not a Western music player, he said to me, we Palestinians love everything beautiful. We love jazz, we love hip hop. Just because the Israelis play this music is no reason we should not. Now, back in the day, we spoke of life and death, and by any means necessary. But most of us would have had to go very far out of our way to encounter lethal political violence. All of those involved in Kamanjati, and it's about 500 now, they have 5 places in Palestine, including in refugee camps, and they also work in Lebanon, outside of Beirut. All of these kids are experience relentless subjugation. For example, just in June, their orchestra was going to go into East Jerusalem to play the Eroica, Beethoven's Third. And as is often the case, young men, that means young teenagers, they weren't allowed past the checkpoint, so they couldn't perform. This happens all the time. They cannot travel in and out of the West Bank. But the music they choose to explore and serve isn't seen as part of that oppression. In Kinshasa, and although I've been to Kinshasa, I based this part of the book on a film that I saw called Kinshasa Symphony. And because I had been to Kinshasa, I was stunned that there could be a symphony orchestra under these circumstances. And these musicians, some of whom lived in hovels and were often hungry, were outside sweating every night, fighting bugs and bad light to play Beethoven and Ravel, the music of the very imperialists who set their country on the tortuous path from which it has yet to recover. On the streets of the UK, the homeless of all ethnicities are finding deliverance in opera. What I found is that in places where basic survival is closer to the edge, people don't care where their joy comes from. They grab it with both hands and hold it tight. They have something to teach us. I don't deny that cultural warfare was heady and exciting, helped bring about necessary changes in how people of color were perceived and started righting a lot of wrongs. But just as my classical music trolls and the Republican Tea Partiers are howling at the diminution of their light because they can feel their world just changing, we too must admit that as our world is changing, becoming more global, cross-pollinating at the speed of light, so must our cultural battle lines adapt. Many of our young people are already there, but some of us older folk, holding on to our glory days and their hard-won victories, as well as the keys to several kingdoms, are far more hesitant. I absolutely believe that an understanding of history is necessary and the preservation of cultural texture is important, but I also maintain that you don't deny your own heritage or beauty by embracing the transformative joy of another, and that one joy need not cancel out the other. Not every child is going to love classical music, but every child should be allowed to experience it and make up his or her own mind, at which point the charge becomes getting the infrastructure, the instruments, and the lessons to where they can access it. Now, for example, and I had hoped that Chichi Nwaneko of the Age of Enlightenment Orchestra would be here, but I got a text, she was in a meeting that ended at 3:15. But the OAE has a program called Tots on the Bus, and I went to one of them, and it is from 1-year-olds, in a group for an hour with instruments, and it's like we're going on a journey, it's the beginning of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and they go to different parts of Europe with different instruments, and it is absolutely geared. They're concentrating on 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds, but there were some that were 1, there were some that were 5, and it was filled. In the group that I went to, there were 2 Black families. The OAE is doing all kinds of amazing things with getting access, but the kids who don't have the parents who know about what's going on at the South Bank Center, they have to see this, and it's got to be more. Once they say, "Oh, I want to do that," it's got to be more than once a week for a year, which is part of what the government is doing. And now, I could talk for Texas about this. And one of the things is, of course, everybody is so excited about the Olympics and what's, in dedicating stuff for sports. And what is that going to do to the availability of resources? Thank you.
Thank you.